Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch Podcast, the show where we do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. I'm your host, Paige Vanderbeck, and together we're going to explore magic and spirituality, social justice, the psychic realm, and truly modern witchcraft. Happy Halloween, my witchy friends. Thank you so much for tuning in to my annual Very Fat Feminist Halloween special. Every year for this sacred time, I examine some of the myths, monsters, and magic that make up our favorite Halloween traditions and explain where the quintessential image of the Halloween witch comes from. Last year we looked at the origins of zombies and trick-or-treating. The year before we enjoyed some spicy pumpkins and some love divination. And in years previous I had fun researching stuff like Victorian Halloween games, spooky omens and signs, black cats, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the Halloween witch capital of North America, Salem, Massachusetts. These really are, they're my favorite episodes. They're my favorite episodes every year. The entire run of the show, they're my favorite. I love looking at this stuff that is, it's considered, kind of frivolous. It's frivolous entertainment type stuff. And understanding what makes it so important to us. If Halloween didn't matter, it wouldn't have persisted for so many centuries. And wouldn't have so many similar holidays and traditions around the world. Just because these other holidays that aren't in North America aren't specifically Halloween doesn't mean they don't have the same kind of spirit, where they look at death and darkness from a different point of view. Around Halloween, we explore themes like death and fear and real magic, and even community and love, What does it mean to be alive? And what does it mean for life to come to an end? Halloween makes us think about something that scares most of us, which is, what will I do if I have nothing and no one? What would you trade to make sure that you had enough to eat, to feed your family, to fall in love, to chase your dreams, to make yourself comfortable? Would you give up your loved ones, your freedom, your place in society? Would you give up the mysterious and the invisible part of yourself that makes you human? Would you trade your eternal peace for a fleeting bit of happiness in this very temporary life? The Halloween witch is someone who's made the ultimate sacrifice in exchange for the ultimate power. She's danced with the devil in the darkest, wildest places, and she's given up her body, her name, and her soul in exchange for power, fame, and fortune. And she's the only one who knows if it was really worth the price. The ultimate witch trope in North America, and possibly everywhere at this point, is that the witch has sold off her soul to the devil in exchange for her magic powers or for some way to get everything that she desires. In making this pact with Satan, the witch has given up their morals and values, their very humanity, and doomed themselves to an eternity in hell after they die. Of course, this is not something only witches do. Anyone can sell their soul to the devil. Good news, everybody. We can all do that if we want. We've come to call this trope, this idea, a Faustian bargain, which is named for the famous German legend about a doctor who sells his soul to a demonic emissary of the devil in exchange for unlimited knowledge and earthly pleasures. The demon, Mephistopheles, tells Faust that he has a set number of years to enjoy the spoils of his bargain, but then the devil will come for him and he will be enslaved for eternity. It's a big deal. My inner commitment phobe just goes, "Ooh, I don't know about all that." In some versions of the story, Faust is forced to pay his price at the end, but in others, God grants him mercy based on the word of an innocent young woman who forgives and believes in Faust, even though he completely ruins her life and leads to her being executed. So when this bargain is struck by witches, there's rarely any redemption waiting in the wings, right? And instead, witches make this pact with the devil, often through some sort of sexual means by letting the devil have sex with them or participating in an orgy, and are imbued with dark powers to chase after their desires on their own. In the end, witches often just burn in hell, or because, it's not even funny, but they just usually burn in hell or become Satan's bride forever, or what have you. Of course, the fact that women weren't considered people and were totally socially powerless never seems to come up in a lot of these stories as context or explanation, but we know better now. I like to say that when you deny women the right to be people, they have to become something else. And one of those things that lots of women have chosen to become is witches. Faust, the doctor, was depressed and he was dissatisfied with life and wanted more. But when it comes to witches, most of them are destitute, oppressed, in danger in some way, and have no hope for the future unless some man decides to make her his wife. That's really it. So their level of desperation is, I think, a bit deeper and a lot more relatable than Faust going, I just wish that everything was better, or that I had more, or that I was better than everybody else. I'm sure lots of people feel like that all the time, but I feel like giving up your soul forever, the price for Faust seems a lot steeper than it does for the witches, I think. I'd actually love a story where God has been letting in these so-called witches into heaven this whole time because the patriarchy is gross. Like, like a Salem judge ends up, somewhere near heaven and he sees all the witches he condemned to die, just past the pearly gates, and then and then St. Peter pulls the lever and down he goes. That would be so great. So in any case, these Faustian bargains feature pretty heavily in Halloween stories and traditions, and even movies and stories we don't associate so strictly with Halloween. In fact, this is like one of our favorite stories as humans. It's a story we tell over and over and over. Even in the Bible, Eve risks paradise to eat from the tree of knowledge at the insistence of the serpent in the garden, who is, that could be Satan or it could be Lilith, depending on who you ask or how you read it. And we change the characters in a lot of incredible ways, often replacing Satan for some other emissary of darkness, So one of my favorites of these kind of alternative versions of this, where it's not religious in any way, right? It's the Little Shop of Horrors, and definitely the musical version. They're both great, but the musical version is just more fun. So Seymour is an impoverished orphan living on Skid Row. It's so great, and basically indebted to his boss / foster parent in this flower shop, and he finds a strange and unusual plant during a total eclipse of the sun, as it goes in the movie. And it's so beautiful but bizarre looking fly trap type plant that he names Audrey 2, after his best friend and love interest. When they put the plant into the window of the shop, they get customers coming in and asking questions and buying flowers, and suddenly business is really good, and they're all broke and nobody ever comes in, so it means a lot. But the plant is not so healthy, not doing so well. Seymour has been trying absolutely everything he knows, and finally he discovers that what the plant eats is blood. Fresh human blood, to be specific, and that's it. So he starts feeding the plant his own blood, doesn't tell anybody, and suddenly business isn't just good, it's blowing up. And Seymour starts getting not just, paid better because the shop is doing well, he starts getting a lot of attention, and he's becoming famous even. At a certain point, the plant gets so big and so hungry that Seymour's, he's been pricking his fingers and feeding him that way. It just won't do it anymore, and the plant needs more. The plant, by the way, is voiced by Levi Stubbs of the Four Tops in this musical version, and fabulous. Just like the best performance of all time. So this plant tells Seymour that if he feeds the plant, he will get everything that his heart desires, including Audrey, who is busy dating a very sadistic dentist played by Steve Martin in a black wig who beats on her. God, they just don't write him like this anymore. It's such a perfect movie. So what is Seymour to do? Is he supposed to kill somebody, lie to Audrey, give up his morals and his values, and become a monster? You bet your ass. As the plant says, the guy sure looks like plant food to me, and I agree. Steve Martin did a good job of being really hateable. That's what makes him so great. But where's the damnation involved in this story, right? Seymour gives everything up. He feeds the dentist to the plant. This plant is not actually like a one-off. In most plants, this plant is going to propagate eventually. It's actually a space alien who just needed to get big enough to create small spores or little babies or seeds, however it does it, to take over the planet and consume the entire human race. That's its plan. So Seymour's bargain is actually a little more intense than Faust's because there's like a way bigger consequence for like a lot more people. Of course, once Seymour kind of clues in that everybody's in danger, he gets pretty serious about killing the plant and saving humanity and saying fuck it and giving up the fame and fortune. In some versions that goes okay, but in another version there's two endings for that movie. In one version it goes great and Seymour saves the planet for the most part. In another one, not so much. It's a fabulous rendition of this because morality is not simply religious in nature. You know, it doesn't matter if it's Satan or if it's a giant space alien. Consequences are consequences. Bargains are bargains. And morals and values are morals and values, whether they come from God or just from what you know is right and wrong in your heart. Another version of the Faustian bargain that doesn't have the religious undertones, but is very magical in nature, and that I think kind of slips people's minds, is The Little Mermaid. Ariel gives up her mermaid life in exchange for humanity and a human soul. So it's a bit of a reversal on the trope, right? And that's in the book. In the Disney movie, they don't say anything about a soul. And Ursula is simply using this bargain to gain power and control over the seas. I like both these versions because you see how desperation and being denied freedom and happiness and security is a tool of all kinds of evil. When you get real serious, and these are both very fun musical movies, but when you get serious about it, if Seymour lived in a country where orphans and foster kids weren't at the mercy of, unscrupulous adopters and, poverty in general, maybe the plant would have just withered on the vine and never eaten anybody. And if Ariel's father hadn't denied her her dream of loving whomever she chose, she never would have traded in her tail and left the kingdom vulnerable when the witch came to collect what was due. And, you see this this vein of, I'm going to get what I need, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that. And I think that, even though these are slightly extreme examples, I think that's something a lot of us can relate to, even as why we chose to start practicing witchcraft in the first place. I started practicing witchcraft at a very young age. I never signed my name in the devil's book or anything like that, but maybe I wasn't so desperate. But I lived in a situation where I often felt a lot of desperation and had no power over my life and my future. Not just because I was a kid. The home I grew up in was abusive. And though I wasn't, totally aware at the time, I'm a neurodivergent person, and I struggled really hard to find my place in the world and in society. I didn't fit in at all, and I was scared all the time. Didn't have a support system, didn't have a lot of opportunities. I was super, super lonely and also very sensitive. Magic appealed to me because it filled a whole bunch of holes inside me that made the world make a little bit more sense. Would I have needed magic if everything was perfect and I was quote unquote normal? I don't know, maybe. I probably would have still found my way to it because I just feel like, I don't know. I've always felt like a witch at heart. That always made sense. But I've also always been sad and scared and alone. So, who knows, right? Even when being a witch alienates me from others just because they aren't, it still makes me feel connected to myself. It still fills in those gaps in the world. It makes me feel like I fit into the world. So while I can't see me actually killing anyone over it, I have to admit that when my faith feels a little bit shaky, I tend to feel pretty desperate to hold on to it. It feels like the end of the world. And I don't know what I would do to hold on to my life as a witch and the magic that I see everywhere. If that was threatened, I don't know what I would do. Now, most witches aren't making deals with the devil. A lot of witches don't even have these kind of, situations. You don't have to only find witchcraft through, pain and suffering. That's not what I'm saying at all. Fortunately, everyone can practice magic if they want to. So, people who practice magic or follow the path of the witch, they often have a strong moral imperative to help others. It's often not even about doing something for themselves or getting themselves out of a tough situation. Though I guess you could argue that is kind of a different kind of bargain that you strike. Many witches use their magic to fight climate change, or empower oppressed people, or raise money for those in need, or even just soothe the pain of people around them. So maybe instead of a bargain that's driven by desperation, it's an expression of gratitude for the gift of living in a magical world. In exchange for getting to live with magic, I'm going to pass the magic on to other people. But that doesn't mean that the devil doesn't still have its hold on us, especially at Halloween. There are real witches, of course, who work with Lucifer or Satan or the Christian devil as a deity in their magic. There are witches who work with demons and the kings of hell and hell as a concept. And they are, quite frankly, just totally normal. They're just totally normal witches. In the book New World Witchery, Corey Thomas Hutchison, the host of the podcast by the same name, asks, is there room for the devil in modern witchcraft? And the resounding answer I've heard when I ask is, yes, absolutely. Who doesn't want to live deliciously, as they say? When I was young, it was really important to distinguish witchcraft from devil worship, to change public opinions of pagan witchcraft, and also for safety. In some places, even in North America right now, it's still pretty scary to be associated with the devil, and this can put some people's lives in danger depending on where they live. But in general, we've gotten to a place where satanic witches and goddess worshippers can stand hand in hand and say your religion will not dominate us, and that is a really beautiful thing. But those are not the people that I'm talking about today, because that is normal now. The devil that Luciferian, satanic, demonologist witches work with or worship in their practice might not even be the same devil that I'm talking about today, because there isn't just one. In North America, the devil is alive and well, and you don't even have to go as far back as Salem in 1692 to find those striking Faustian bargains that affect us all and change the course of history. I'm sure many of you have heard the tales of the famous musician who ventures to a crossroads at midnight to meet the devil, sell his soul, and become, the best singer or player that there ever was. The devil tunes the musician's instrument, be it a guitar or a fiddle or what have you, and he hands it back, and the musician becomes, this unearthly fast and innovative player who blows everyone's mind. We love this story, especially around Halloween. I love this story. It is a true North American folktale and an absolute classic. But what's neat about it is it featured real people, and the person and people connected to this story really did change the face of music forever. It's not the first or only Faustian bargain in North American folklore, but it is the one with the best soundtrack. So Robert Johnson was a mediocre, if not bad, guitar player in rural Mississippi in the 1930s who had lived a hard life, and he had lost a lot. But he dreamed of being the greatest blues man of all time. He disappeared from the public record for a year or two, and when he reemerged, his style had completely changed. He even had like an extra guitar string attached to the guitar that made it sound like two people were playing at once, like he wasn't playing the guitar by himself. His lyrics had taken on kind of an eerie and a magical vibe, and no one who heard him could deny that it was really good, really, really good. It's the kind of music that just didn't exist at the time, and it really, really got to people. No one had played like that. No one had quite so much emotion coming through, even with a genre that's already as emotional as the blues. Robert Johnson is still considered the king of the Delta blues, the originator of a whole new style, and the inspiration behind all of the badass rock and blues and country that came later, that's still coming out. Rumor had it that Johnson had taken his guitar to the crossroads at midnight, where a big black man had tuned his guitar and showed him a few licks, and in exchange, Robert would be the greatest blues singer and player of all time. This actually echoed another story by a Southern blues man, Tommy Johnson, no relation. You have these two guys in the South, and during their lifetime, other people told the story for them. So we don't actually know. We don't have strict confirmation that either of them made any such bargain, but that's the way stories go, right? And this story really seemed to be backed up by the music when you listen to Robert Johnson. He wrote songs about the crossroads, about hellhounds, mojo, hoodoo, and walking with the devil himself. As is explained in the documentary Devil at the Crossroads, all about the life of Robert Johnson, there are two kind of important bits of cultural context that can help open you up to the genius and the magic of the King of the Delta blues. First is that racism had, as it always has had, a remarkably tight grip on the U.S., especially when you go to the southeastern kind of corner there, and most especially in Mississippi. Likewise, thanks to African religions being outlawed from the time of slavery, Christianity was the dominant religion, and the fear of the devil was very, very real. Hoodoo, a magical practice developed by black people in the southern U.S., which combined traditional African magic with like Christian, European, and like indigenous practices that were found wherever it is that they were living, was practiced in some way by many black Southerners, church-going or otherwise. So you have this kind of war. You have these racial overtones, and then you also have these religious overtones with two different religions kind of going back and forth. And even then, they're not really different. Hoodoo is not a religion on its own, right? It's a set of practices that can be practiced with any religion. So you often had both being practiced at the same time. So to hear what Robert Johnson is really singing about in any of these songs, you have to look through both of these lenses kind of simultaneously to get the whole story. For example, the song Hellhound on My Trail could be seen metaphorically about the dangers of being targeted and lynched by racists at seemingly every turn. It can really convey that feeling that it's only a matter of time before they catch up with me and decide it's my time to die. You can really feel that in the song. And Mississippi was it was like the lynching capital of the entire southern U.S. at the time. So that was a very serious, very real fear. When you look at it through this kind of magical lens, it could speak to the idea that Robert's contract with the devil would be coming due, and he'd have to pay for the success granted to him by the devil. Of course, there's also the chance that both these things are brewing at the same time. It could be about both. In her book Voodoo, Lilith Dorsey explains that the hoodoo devil does not embody evil, as is the case of Christianity. This devil, also called the Rider or the Big Black Man, opens roadways and bestows talent and good fortune. Corey Hutchison differentiates between the Christian Satan, the embodiment of pure evil, and the folklore devil as well. The folklore devil, and indeed the hoodoo devil, kind of take on the same role as the modern satanic, like Church of Satan version of the devil, who is a spirit or a deity for the people, who helps break down the paths of free will and innovation by granting them the ability to break free of obstacles and bondage. With strict evangelical Christianity, this is seen as evil, because pleasure and luxury and fame and fortune are considered indulgent, and they're from the darker side of life. You should be happy with your limitations and boundaries and living by these strict codes that are, as far as you know, what God wants. Before heavy metal was a twinkle in Black Sabbath's eye, the blues was devil music. Like I said, it was associated with all the things that Christianity doesn't approve of. So hard drinking, sexual dancing, loose morals, a lack of work ethic. It was music that expressed raw emotion in a time when everything was hard and scary, which people will always try to avoid. Robert Johnson was exactly that guy. He was like proof to many evangelical Christians that the blues was the devil's music. He was a rambling man, meaning he hopped trains and moved from place to place doing odd jobs, considered working in the fields to be no better than indentured servitude, and believed that he was capable of a lot more. I agree with him. This adds another interesting dimension to the identity of the hoodoo devil, which is the old man at the crossroads. So, Papa Legba is a loa in hoodoo and voodoo, a deity or a powerful spirit who stands at the crossroads and relays messages and requests between the visible and invisible, the mundane and magic worlds. He's petitioned at the beginning of rituals and prayers so that one might have access to the other Loa. He's also a bit of a patron of roadways and travel, of liminal spaces and times. He's the father figure or the king of kings in Lilith Dorsey's book Voodoo, the paternal force of creation in the universe. So it's not a far stretch to imagine that the black man who met the Ramblin' Man, Robert Johnson, at the crossroads at midnight and cleared away the obstacles keeping him from his musical dreams was Papa Legba, instead of some cloven-hooved red imp with horns, right? Both of these things are just as likely sounding to me. Instead of a fiery fiddle showdown type scene, imagine two remarkably talented men sharing rum and cigars on an old dirt road under the stars and changing the course of musical history by sharing a little bit of what it means to be black in America, or just what it means to be human, even. Of course, associating any sort of empowering black deity and ancestor with the devil is like trick number 1 out of the racist Christian toolkit. So maybe that's a kind of a third lens that you've got to look through. I get why people might want to distance Robert's music from the devil, because they don't want to feed into that system. But I think doing so removes something kind of magical and meaningful from it. Also, it makes the ending of the story a little less cool and way more sad. Like, it just takes off the badass edge to the story. So Robert Johnson sells his soul to the devil, right? And becomes the most influential, amazing blues musician of all time. But what then? Where does the story go from there? You usually don't hear anything else. This man's recording career lasted less than 10 months. He put down 29 distinct songs with 13 alternatives, and then he was poisoned on account of being a hard-drinking womanizer who played the devil's music. He was only 27 years old when he died. That is a wild story. A wild story. And what's really wild is that I had heard the story of him selling his soul and, getting the guitar skills a million times. And it wasn't until I realized I didn't know what happened to him after that I looked it up and figured it out. This story has a wild ending that seems to really support that he really only got one shot. He had a limited amount of time in which to use the goodwill given to him by the devil and the talent given to him by the devil, and it sounds like he really used it. He really used it, And, he didn't get to enjoy his success as far as I know. I mean, who knows, in the afterlife, he might know exactly what he pulled off, and he might be very proud of himself. I love that for him. He didn't get to enjoy his success, but he really did get the influence that he wanted. I don't think people really pay attention to how much music and any sort of art really influences society. There was this show, it was on TV for a while. Now, I don't normally watch anything with time travel. I ended up watching this kind of by accident, and I ended up really liking it, so I kept with it. But it was called Timeless. I don't love time travel. It's too much for me. My brain can't stop following all the little threads, and there are just so many threads. But there is an episode where someone wants to go back in time, and they want to keep Robert Johnson from recording these 29 songs. Like, it's so few. They want to go back in time, and they want to stop that from happening. And most of the people in the group have no idea why this would matter. I mean, first of all, none of them are horrified that it means that rock and roll wouldn't exist, which I thought was enough to be horrifying. Maybe that's just me. But, the person in the group who knows anything about Robert Johnson pointed things out, like, I need you to think about the things that are associated with rock and roll and with music, the revolutionary aspect of music. without rock and roll, would we have had anything like the sexual revolution? If Elvis had never, shook his hips and made teenagers go crazy, would we have not had the sexual revolution of the 60s? And my God, then where would we be? And if we hadn't had that aspect of the revolution, would we have not had anything like the political gains? What about civil rights? Where would we be with that? It's just, as soon as you look at how important, how influential this limited catalog of songs that this guy put down in, like, I don't know, all told it was like 7 days of recording. That's a wild amount of influence for a kid who came from nothing and had very little and showed up one day with some uncanny musical talent. I think that's just one of those things that makes me believe the magical aspect of the story even more. The devil is an important figure in North America, and at Halloween especially, because he represents another path that's different from the one we're told us is the only way to go. Halloween isn't just about candy or ghosts or spooky shit. It's about embracing life, which of course means embracing death. About living to the fullest, whether that living is good or bad, easy or hard, sweet or sour. Halloween begs you to taste both and see them both as an important part of living and loving and being both a physical being and a spiritual one. There's no shame in reaching for the things that will make us happy. No one deserves more happiness than anyone else, and chasing your own happiness is not an evil act. And that goes also for claiming power and strength that have been denied to you. Real talk, I love the devil. Stories about the devil are great. He makes amazing cheesy TV. The best music is anything labeled the devil's music. Deities from other mythologies and religions that are often tied to the devil in some way are usually the coolest of their respective pantheons. I mean, I didn't write that. That's just the way it goes. And I don't know, I really relate to that feeling of, I guess desperation, but of need. Real need, Especially if you live in a time, in a world, in a culture where the devil is something to really, really fear. You have to be in an incredible state of need, but also incredibly committed to make a Faustian bargain, to make an exchange, or even to just align yourself with this kind of energy. I was actually really disappointed in Hocus Pocus Part 2 on Disney there, because they kind of, they went back a little bit. The witches did not get their powers from the devil, but from nature, in a book handed over by a single mysterious witch they knew for less than 5 minutes. It felt like a real cop-out. That's not how things work. It felt like pandering, Like they wanted us to like the witches, and they assumed that if they were truly devil-worshipping witches, we couldn't love them. But we already did, and they already were. We already loved these satanic witches with a book wrapped in human skin who were summoned via a candle made of the fat of a hanged man. I mean, that's just... It's wild to think that that was in a Disney movie in Hocus Pocus back in 1993. But we loved that, and none of that seemed off or wrong, and I don't know if any real witches had a problem with that, but I personally, as a real witch, have never had a problem with a real, with a fictionalized version of witchcraft as long as it's fiction. None of that is real. None of that is real. No one has books made from the skin of fucking human beings or the fat of a hanged man. None of that is real witchcraft. It's not like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina where they start throwing in all of these things from real witchcraft, like real goddesses and stuff like that. It was clear from the beginning that they were fictional witches, that they were a fairy tale character. And I think what they did in the second one was actually try to align them more with real witches, and personally, I didn't need that. Also, I thought it was really weird that they included this kind of throwaway to this entire idea of desperation. The absolute idiot who gets them resurrected in the movie. He claims that the reason he's bringing them back is because they're not truly evil. They had no choice but to be evil because they were single women in Salem during a time when they had no power and were desperate. But then what we see isn't total desperation. We see a little bit of bullying, of course. We also see a pretty lady in the forest. We don't see them give up a whole lot because they already weren't really liked in town. They didn't actually give up any sort of social status. They didn't give up their soul. They didn't give up anything for witchcraft. It just came to them and they just took it. So there was no embodiment of evil. There was nothing. And this one throwaway line is treated as proof that this guy, was an idiot, or that he sucked, or that he was, just making assumptions, which he did. But there was definitely something to it if they had just left the story intact. Disney stories got no fucking teeth anymore. That's just the way that is. So we think of Disney now as super sanitized. And even in the 90s, Disney was pretty sanitized as far as, fairy tales or even history goes. I'm thinking Pocahontas here. But even then, we could have these witches who had sold their souls to Satan and had these gruesome witchy tools and things like that. And they couldn't do that anymore under what Disney is now. And personally, I just didn't need that rewrite. That, to me, really bugged me. It really bugged me. Because I think the devil has earned his place in Halloween lore and movies and in the history of witchcraft. And I don't think any overpaid network executive should deny him that if they know what's good for them. The devil in the first Hocus Pocus was played by Gary Marshall. He's not the real devil, right? But the only version of the devil we see. So it's not even like it was a super serious, very scary way of exploring that. It was mainly, unspoken, but I think to me, removing that aspect, it makes all of the evil, all of the gross, disgusting things the witches do, it makes them more gross and disgusting, not less. Part of the reason Disney did this is, because quite frankly, it's an American company, and a large portion of American culture, or I should say evangelical Christianity, still sees the devil everywhere. They see evil around every corner, and their mission is to stamp it out. Of course, the things in the places in which evil reside for them are what's truly scary to the rest of us, because it's mainly people that don't fit their incredibly rigid definition of goodness. So rigid that it doesn't even fit into how goodness is defined in their Bible. And their methods for dealing with what they see as evil are genuinely cartoonishly awful. Unfortunately, evangelicals are not the only religion or even spiritual group that see evil everywhere and worship at the altar of the fearmonger. New Age spirituality, which is different than witchcraft and paganism, though there are certainly lots of overlapping areas, is also riddled with this fear of evil. As I was working on this episode, I thought back to when I worked in a witch store, and there was this woman who had become friends with my boss, and all of us who worked there, honestly, she became my friend as well, and she's clairvoyant. And suddenly, once she was around all the time, and certainly once she got hired, the store was regularly riddled with demons. Every customer who wasn't super friendly had a demon attached to them. We had to constantly be cleansing and warding and protecting ourselves from these evil entities. My boss started threatening to fire anyone involved in dark stuff, and that is an actual quote. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? And more than once, this woman convinced my boss to close the store because some demon that only she could see was causing trouble inside, and it's why people were in a bad mood. Every time things weren't perfect, there was a demon or a nasty spirit or something. My anxiety on a regular basis just flew through the roof. At first, because I believed her, right? She's a psychic. She sees things that I don't. But it happened so much that I couldn't believe it anymore. Is the world really so filled with actual evil, with demons and monsters and spirits, that we constantly have to be wary and that's what we're using our magic for all the time? And if none of our crystals and our incense and our cleansings actually kept the demons out in the first place, why would I believe that they're removing them once they're inside? I realized that she was manipulating us with our fear, that she was using it to make herself important to my boss, and she did get a job there. She actually, technically I can say it, she got my job. I personally cannot be motivated by fear. It took me a little bit of time to recognize that's what was happening, but that is something that I will recognize. The abusive home that I was raised in made me desperate for control of my life, helped me reach out to witchcraft. It made me wary of evil and abuse, because I know those things exist. But it also taught me how oppressive fear is, and how much that breaks you down when you live with it all the time. When I was 14, my dad left my mom and took my brother and I, and he raised us, because the abuse that I was living with was just not something that I could survive much longer. And suddenly, I didn't have to be afraid all the time, and that took me a really long time to figure out. You know what I mean? I went from being afraid from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, and those feelings don't just go away right away. It's a habit you get into. It's the way your brain works. But eventually, the weight started to lift off my shoulders, and that's when I was able to see how heavy that it really was, how heavy it still can be at times. And when this fear is invisible or even intangible, demons no one can see, that desperation that you feel, and the hopelessness, it is all consuming. There's nothing anyone else can do about demons that only one person can see. And if none of the magic that any of us does on a regular basis in the store to make ourselves feel more comfortable there was able to fight this evil, well, then nothing we did was actually going to be able to make anything change. This woman that I technically worked with, the fear of evil and darkness had completely consumed her. And then it consumed my boss. And then it consumed the entire store. My boss was so afraid of darkness that I was punished and was demoted because I had gone to a pagan Pride Day celebration, which was organized by people my boss was afraid of. She thought that by going, I was inviting darkness back with me into her store, into her environment. Like I was infected with it, and I was going to spread it to everyone there. And that is the day that I left the store. My spiritual practice was very tied up with my job there. I guess it technically still is with my job here, but it was very tied up with my job, and witchcraft wasn't supposed to make me more afraid. It was supposed to help me be strong and brave and open to things that I don't understand or can't see. That's what brought me to it in the first place. That's what made it something that worked so well for me as a young kid. I know that I cannot avoid darkness. I can't even always make it go away, even when I feel that it's all around me. But something that I do know how to do is try to look at it head on and see it for what it is, and try to find solutions. I try to remember that this world, this life is full of darkness and light at the same time, and you don't just get one or the other. You have to take both, or you're not really living. That's just the way the world is. You're never going to be able to completely avoid the things that frighten you, unfortunately. Wouldn't that be lovely? But there's other ways to deal with it that don't require you to be acting from a place of fear constantly. And that's why the scary costumes, the scary movies, the creepy, crawly, gory, and nasty and spooky aspects of Halloween are so important to us. That's why the devil is important. The devil represents balance and choice in the things that we can't see or don't understand. On Halloween, we look into the face of the devil and we can see him differently. Instead of seeing a towering inferno of evil with big horns and cloven hooves, we see a kindly old man with sun-kissed black skin, a straw hat, and a cane, who speaks to you like his own child. He tunes your guitar and he steps aside. So you can choose the direction you'll walk in as you collect both tricks and treats along the road of life. So happy Halloween, witches. If you meet the devil tonight, put in a good word for me, will you? So obviously, today is not Halloween. I had a really hard time getting an episode out, and was still working on it on the afternoon of the 31st. I was willing to stay glued to the screen until I was finished. And then I snapped at my sister to leave me alone because she was bugging me, but she wanted me to come see some cute trick-or-treaters at the door. And that's when I realized I was about to miss Halloween completely. Halloween isn't the only day of the year when I could celebrate being a witch, but it is kind of the biggest, the most important. And it's the day when I'm not alone in celebrating that. You know, even those who aren't witches celebrate the lasting power and magic of the witch, and that is really important to me. It's also energizing and inspiring. So missing it to put out a podcast episode kind of defeats the purpose of my podcast in the first place. Fortunately, November 11th, 11/11, is a significant day for me because that is the anniversary of the show. November 11th, 2015 at like 9 p.m. I released my very first ever episode. I didn't know if anyone would hear it, let alone like it. All I knew is that I wanted to share it. I had left the job I talked about earlier at the store in October that year, and I knew I wasn't ready to let go of working as a witch. I just didn't know how to do what I had been doing, which wasn't really about sales. It was about talking to and educating people about magic, helping them find their way into magic and witchcraft. I didn't know how to do that without the store. And of course, without the constant fear and anxiety and fucking Jesus. Retail is like a way harder job than people think it is. The fatigue and the physical pain that came with working. I didn't know how to do it without all of that. How do you make a living without all of that, you know? I had no money. It was taking a really long time for unemployment insurance to pay out. And I knew that if I shifted my attention away from witchcraft and magic, I was going to lose it. I was going to lose this feeling that I'd had for the first time in my life. Like, oh my God, this is it. I figured it out, you know? So I took a chance and I started doing the show. And slowly but surely, I saw it start to grow all the time. Every day, every week, every month, every episode. More and more of you tuned in or followed me on social media. You commented, critiqued, shared what I was doing, whatever. And not only were you all subscribing and following, but you were so genuinely supportive and kind and encouraging. I mean, like the nicest, the kindest, the coolest witches in the world all seem to listen to my show, and just that, I mean, that really set me free. That scary witch store and that crazy way that it ended, that's nothing new for me. That was par for the course. I mean, my friends and I used to joke that I had a talent for finding the wackiest and most unethical bosses and businesses. And every job that I had went down in flames in spectacular but traumatic fashion. I just couldn't make it work. And I mean, you need to make a living somehow. You know, we live in a capitalistic society. And I felt like a total failure all the time. I mean, that's also scary as hell. The Fat Feminist Witch is technically the only job I've ever had in my life that lasted longer than a year and a half at a time. It's now been 7 years that I've been doing the show, and I have all of you to thank for that. Every day isn't sunshine and rainbows or super easy, but I cannot even imagine having a different job. You know, this is me now. This is who I am. This is what I do. And I'm so grateful for everyone who's joined me at any point in the last 7 years, and all of those who will in the future. You have helped me make my life so much more magical than it ever was before. So, thank you. The Fat Feminist Witch Podcast is written and hosted by me, Paige Vanderbeck. And if you like it, you can find more of my writing at thefatfeministwitch.ca, not .com.ca. You can also check out my books, which I have been writing since 2020. The newest, The Spell Jar Book for Beginners, is a creative way of working magic with bottles and jars. Witchcraft for Emotional Wisdom helps you heal and care for yourself, inside and out, body and soul. The Grimoire Journal teaches you how to write your own spells and rituals. It has prompts and recipes and room to write. And Green Witchcraft introduces you to working with natural forces and materials in spellcraft in life. The last one is a bestseller. Don't mean to brag, but I'm gonna. It's also available in quite a few different languages, including German and Polish. So check that one out. You can follow me all across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and sometimes Instagram by searching for The Fat Feminist Witch. But my most used platform is Twitter, and that is at Fat Feminist Witch. So there's an I missing there. I will never reach out to you personally through these platforms and try to sell you anything, including tarot or palm readings. This is big on Instagram, so please be wary. I simply use them to share official links to my art and my content, or to share my thoughts and feelings through public posts, so no direct messages. Finally, you can support the podcast financially by going to my website and clicking Buy Me a Coffee to make a small one-time donation. You can enroll in my monthly membership program through patreon.com/thefatfeministwitch, or you can get really fun t-shirts, stickers, notebooks, mugs, wall art, and a whole lot more from my TeePublic shop, which is linked in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Fat Feminist Witch Podcast, friends, seekers, and witches. Until we meet again.